40th birthday for Pac-Man. Woo!
Oh, happy birthday, guy.
May 22nd, 1980. Also a Taurus like me, Pac-Man. Tauruses are nice.
I thought you said tourist.
Well, he was a Taurus at first. Pac-Man comes out originally by Namco. Toru Iwatani developed it at Namco. They put it in a few locations on May 22nd, and then later they widely released it in Japan later, and it came to the U.S. near the end of the year, I believe, some early December, mid-December, something like that. I don't know the specific time, but somewhere near the end of the year. So it's a 1980 video game here. So Pac-Man is an interesting game because you can almost look at Pac-Man and see like this is the official launching point into the mainstream and pop culture of video games, and it started with Pac-Man. By and large, you can almost divide up video games how they were looked at almost on a creative level pre and post Pac-Man to me. Before Pac-Man, if you look at, there was obviously Space Invaders, there were some arcade games. To me, they were more, we'll just say, abstract in sort of creation. It's like, oh, you're a spaceship guy, you're just shooting stuff, or you're like the Midway game. Oh, you're doing an Old West shootout, you're shooting each other.
Sure.
Or the game I thought of, the vector graphics game that I couldn't think of last week, Warrior, was like the one-on-one lightsaber game, 79.
Warrior. I don't think of that as lightsaber, but yeah,
it's a lightsaber. It kind of looks like a lightsaber. But the whole point is that
there's a pit you can fall into.
Yes, I've only played it once in my life, but these are like more like abstract, what you can do in real life as a video game. You can sword fight, you can shoot out the Old West, you can do shark hunting. I'll bring up a list of games from like say 75 to 79. But you see my point. You are not taking on like a mascot character and then sort of world building to that extent around this cartoonish character that has a personality. This is now thinking about, to me, video games in a brand new way. In Space Invaders, you're a nameless nobody in a ship. In Missile Command, which what year was Missile Command? Was that 80 or 81? You don't have an identity. You're just commanding the ICBM knockout. Missile Command was 80, so around the same time. When you're playing Centipede, you're either a gnome in some version or you're like a spaceship. Like
sure,
you don't have the personality. So
5200 version, you're a little elf with a wand.
Is that you're elf? That's some of the graphics, right? You're an elf, not a gnome. You see what I mean, though?
Yeah.
So, do you have any Pac-Man memories you want to talk about?
I actually wrote about them last week, but Pac-Man always reminds me of my grandparents on my mom's side. Growing up, there was a 5200 in their living room. So I probably played this for my first time, probably like 84, 85. I was born in 82. But I remember sitting on my grandfather's lap and him teaching me how to play Pac-Man. And the weird thing about this 5200 is it would have been my youngest uncle, who I think was just finishing high school probably at that time. But I never saw anyone in my family use that 5200 except for my grandfather and my grandmother. And like every once in a while my mom would play kicks or something on it during the holidays over there. So my grandfather taught me how to play Pac-Man, and it was the only game that either of them I think ever really got attached to. They had an Apple IIe for a long time, and my grandma got really into Lode Runner. But yeah, Pac-Man was like the beginning and the end of video games for some people, and I think that's a good example. It was
it was like the peak to them.
Well, it was one of those things where they weren't ingrained in everyday life, and you could be old enough where something popular would come out and be like, oh, I played Pac-Man. It's like when we talk to people like Frank or whatever, they remember playing Atari or something like that, but they don't always. They did it when it was popular. They did it when it was cool. But
it was still a fad.
It was still a fad.
It was considered a fad.
But no, even into the mid 90s, I remember my grandfather would fire up that 5200 every once in a while and play Pac-Man, to the point where I would look for controllers for him when I'd go to flea markets, because the 5200 controller was notoriously fucking awful. My mom actually got good at taking them apart and cleaning them and putting them back together to keep them in working order for him. And then, like I said, I talked about it in my writing this week, but I remember a memory that I have that's very fond of my grandmother is my grandfather was in the hospital for what must have been, I don't know, it must have been like his baker's dozen heart attack. He had so many heart attacks. And he was in Cleveland Clinic for a couple of weeks. And I was staying with my grandmother watching the house. So she could go, travel, be with him, do all sorts of things. So I was taking care of the mail, answering phone calls, that sort of thing. And they had Pac-Man on their gateway computer. It came in one of those Microsoft Arcade packages. I don't know which one. So I took to playing it. And my grandmother played it as well. And long story short, this one kept track of scores. And I had set some score. It was good at the time. It wasn't like competitive good, but it was good. And like 2 months later, my mom got a random call from my grandmother, and all it was my grandmother telling my mom to tell that punk grandkid of mine I beat his high score, and she hung up the phone.
Wow.
So apparently for 2 months she was very, very intent on beating my high score.
Good for her.
And she did. So I love Pac-Man. I have lots of Pac-Man tchotchke. I love playing the different games. I'm a huge Namco fan. Most people know that. Pac is kind of the Namco mascot. So I have a lot of love for Pac-Man in the games. But I absolutely immediately think of family when it comes to Pac-Man.
Pac-Man, I had this book, Pac-Man. I've had this book forever. This came out in 82. And it's by the editor. It's a consumer guide. And if you want to talk about how many games in the history of video games you could have produced a book like this that not just covers like strategies, it covers all the merchandise, it covers promo items, it talks about,
and that's from when? 82.
82. So we're talking the height.
There's a lot of there's a lot of shit out for it by that point.
But you have in here a culture, like events out in the public that were themed around Pac-Man. This talks about the lawsuit with Casey Munchkin between Philips and Midway, and Atari sued them. Actually, Casey Munchkin's covered in this book, surprisingly. They go through the game and say, oh, it's a decent game. It's kind of surprising, but it's Consumer Reports. Talks about Pac-Man Day happening at malls and events out there, and people dressing up in these. I hope that costume still exists, that giant furry Pac-Man costume.
Terrifying.
It's great. So you're really talking about, this is the first time you could do this with a video game.
Sure.
And there's not many games after this you would have the popularity to have done this with. You probably can talk about maybe 3 or 4 games ever, or that reach, I'd say, the cultural significance. Mario did. But the thing about Mario was, it wasn't a single game that got him there. It had to be multiple games that got Mario there to get ingrained to that extent. With Pac-Man, it was just the one game you needed. And yeah, there were sequels, and Miss Pac-Man definitely helped, but just the one game was enough to sort of shoot him off into the stratosphere.
Sure. And
then it peaked with Miss Pac-Man, and after that it was a slow, down. You peaked with Miss Pac-Man, because after that, Junior Pac-Man, Super Pac-Man, Pac-Man Plus, you kind of run out of steam there with the iterations of the Maze game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you get to Pac-Land, and you have a different game that some people love like me, but
I think Pac-Land is great.
But it's not really a popular game. But
the turbo version is so good.
Is that it's based on the Japanese one? Because you have the long nose. We talked about that in the video game years.
Yeah.
But you see what I mean, though. How many games could you have done a book like this and talked about cultural events in the mainstream, political cartoons where they used them? Sonic, maybe. Mario, Pac-Man.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
I would say Sonic, Mario, Pac-Man are kind of it.
I don't know if Sonic ever reached the heights of Pac-Man in terms of being everywhere and people talk about it in the news, news. Then again, arcades were such on a heavy rise that they were covering arcades like a new phenomenon, because they kind of were to that point. But going back to the games that sort of like, what were video games like? This is a list on Cloud, which is now arcademuseum.com. I missed the original Cloud name. These are the sort of games that came out like on. You talk about 79. You're talking about, I don't know if they're still making Fairchild games in 79, but you had. And then television wasn't really out yet until 80, mainstream. So we're talking about Atari 2600 and then Odyssey 2 in 79, and that's really it. Really?
Yeah.
Because I don't think RCA Studio 2 was really selling. But you had games like Triple Attack, Meteorites, Hyperspace, Meteoroid, Galaxian. You had Lunar Lander, Splash, Fortress, Field Goal, Dodge 'em, Atari Baseball, like Cosmic Monsters. So you had alien games, sports games, army games, or military games, and that's really it. Like that was like your game breadth.
Right.
It was for like adults or geared towards largely a male audience, and that was it. Like they had not figured out the sweet spot of let's get a game that everyone could enjoy, boys and girls, men and women. It's cute, it's colorful. Like it didn't phase them that was an idea yet. It's just amazing. Like that wasn't a thing yet. Then obviously afterwards, we'll throw everything at the wall. We'll get Donkey Kong. We'll license Nintendo will license Popeye. You know, like Nintendo wasn't doing games like this yet.
No. I'm trying to think what they would have been doing at that point.
Let's see. Any Nintendo games came out in 79 here? They had a game called SF High Splitter. What is that game?
I have no idea.
Can't even find it. I'm guessing that would have been like a game like, I don't know, maybe like Radar Scope. They did at this time they did a game called Space Launcher, Head On N, Monkey Magic, Radar Scope, obviously, Sheriff, Battle Shark.
Okay, Sheriff. I was thinking Sheriff would have been that era. So, but that's another like Wild West shootout.
Yeah, like the Midway game. Block Fiber. What is that, like a serial thing? Computer Othello, Shooting Trainer, and then Wild Gunman Shooting Trainer, which was not the Nintendo Wild Gunman we know of. That was probably the light gun one, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
You know, with live actors there.
Right.
I thought that was earlier than 79, but Clov is off on some dates because they have Puckman listed on 79 and it's not 79. Obviously, it's 80. So yeah, so that's what I mean when I talk about the history of video games. You could divide with Pac-Man.
Yes,
you can.
There's a very obvious before and after.
That's what I mean, and that's why most important video game, bar none. Sorry, Norm, I have to rub that in. Anyway, so again, so this is why I think it's important. And obviously, we all love Pac-Man. And I love the resurgence of Pac-Man in the past, say, 10, 12 years with Pac-Man Championship Series and Battle Royale arcade game. Like
Pac-Man Championship Edition, the first one was the reason I bought my 360. And for the
was it really?
For the first month I had my system, it was the only game I had on there was Pac-Man Championship Edition. I literally bought a 360 for that game.
Just to play good old Pac.
Just to play Championship Edition.
And obviously, any barcade you go in, if you can go back into them, has a Battle Royale machine.
Oh, Battle Royale is so good.
It's so good. It's quick. You play the game in a few minutes with 4 people. You know, the cocktail version or the awesome giant deluxe monstrosity one, which I don't know what that even would cost to buy that. 10 grand.
The one with the bar stools and all that shit.
Yeah, the one where
it's got the 4 bar stools and the big TV.
And each player has his own console.
Yeah.
To play with. God, it's fantastic.
There. I also want to mention real quick the popularity of Pac-Man. I mean, he's popular in Japan, but he is hugely popular in the U.S., more so than I think people think. I think people think his popularity is universal. But there are certainly times where I think Pac-Man is probably more popular than in Japan. For instance, these Pac-Man Tamagotchis are U.S. only. They're not even being released in Japan.
Those are somewhat new?
Yeah, they just came out for the 40th anniversary.
So you don't think a lot of those, crappy all-in-one joysticks game steps came out in Japan, just came out here? Like
they might have, but I mean, and Pac-Man is important, but he's not, like, his popularity in the U.S., you know, it's not just an extension of Japanese popularity. In a lot of ways, he's more popular here, I would say, than he even is in Japan.
I guess that makes sense.
There are products that straight up, like I said,
they don't come.
I mean, Tamagotchi, that's Bandai. That's a Japanese company. They make all sorts of special edition ones. They do Pokemon ones. They do Evangelion ones. They do Pac-Man ones, and you think that they would be available over there? There's just they decide they don't care.
We had the cartoon here. I maybe never got translated into Japanese, and obviously we had the hit Buckner and Garcia #1 song there. Yeah, well, there was no video game cartoons before Pac-Man, or there was no you weren't doing hit songs before that, and obviously the amount of toys and plush and PJs, and again, it's all in this book, and I'll talk about this in the NES Punk video that I shot that I have to edit this week there, that it was a phenomenon. And it was such a phenomenon that the utter disappointment over the shitty 2600 version was one of the sparks that lit the video game crash fuse.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking the most popular game, one of the most popular games of all time, we'll just put out a horrible version of.
Absolutely miserable.
Miserable. And I can't believe they let that go out. I mean, obviously they wanted to probably make dates, but like I can't believe they wouldn't think that would be a bad idea. And then plus they overproduced them by several million. Like
They made more copies than there were Ataris sold at that point.
Like, why would you?
I mean, as we've learned about...
They're the anti-Nintendo.
We've learned... Well, I was going to say, you can learn a lot from Nintendo these days. I mean, even your most popular games don't have a 1-to-1 attach rate.
Because that's insane. Why would you do that?
That would be insane. And then to make enough copies so that everyone who owns an Atari can have one, plus sell more systems, so you make them for more than a 1-to-1 attach.
Instead of seeing how something will sell, even do maybe half attach rate. A half attach rate never even happens ever. Well, but let's make sure we do that and then make more afterwards. Like, get that money now, Warner Communications. Get that money right now, and then put us out of business. And then it was a Pac-Man on the 5200. You think they would have realized? Okay, we're kind of make up for our error because it's a lot closer to the arcade, even though it's not an arcade translation because it's wider.
I love the 5200 version. I love the way it looks.
You think they would have figured out that we would not have crappy analog joysticks, or at least provide a digital joystick to play the most popular arcade game? They didn't even provide an option, Atari, for that. They didn't even say, well, we know this is a shitty packing controller. Here's your $20 Pac-Man controller.
Right.
They didn't even do that. They let third parties try to do that, and that's why the third party 5200 controllers like the Wicos go for like $80.
Well, the Wico is kind of like an attachment thing. It's basically
you have to attach it to it. Yes.
You use a standard. You can use the Wico controller,
yes.
Or you can get a Wico adapter that will let you use an Atari 2600 controller as well.
You have to interface with a shitty digital readout of the buttons that almost no game fucking used. You had to do that.
Yeah.
But see what I mean though. So
we've had them at work before.
I have a few of the Wico ones I found at the swap meet for like $15. I saw those with like games like, okay, I'm grabbing these. I know they're hard to find. But you think Atari would have learned Atari is just like the model of never learning their lesson like for like 15 years.
Yeah.
That's basically what happens. Anyway, so happy birthday, Pac-Man. Being 40 isn't bad. Get a few gray hairs, but do some yoga, eat a little healthier. We'll keep going. We'll keep it going strong.